Have you ever wondered what it felt like to be the first human to sense something you could not see, name, or escape from? Imagine standing in a world where darkness was not just the absence of light, but a living force capable of swallowing everything familiar. 4.2 million years ago, our early ancestors walked through landscapes where every shadow carried a threat, and every sudden movement in the grass could mean life or death. In this raw environment, the idea of invisible entities did not begin as belief. It began as survival. Long before rituals, symbols, or gods, there was only instinct, and instinct whispered that something unseen was always watching. When a storm cracked the sky open, it was not just noise, it was a presence. When the wind howled at night, it was not merely the air, it felt like a voice. These early humans lacked language to describe fear, but they could feel its shape. They lived inside a world where the invisible was more real than the visible. Lightning, eruptions, sudden animal calls in the dark, shifting shadows near the firelight, all became signs of forces beyond human control. This was the birthplace of spirituality, long before anyone carved symbols in stone or painted visions on cave walls. Fear did not paralyze them. It guided them. It taught them to pay attention, to sense danger before it arrived, to interpret every sound and every movement as part of a hidden dialogue with the world. And as these sensations grew, something remarkable began to happen. They started connecting fear with meaning. The rustle in the bushes was not random. The glowing sky at dusk was not ordinary. The world around them seemed filled with invisible agents shaping their path, pushing them to adapt, survive, and understand their own place in a vast and unpredictable reality. You have felt this too, in your own way. That moment when something impossible to describe pulls your attention, that instinctive certainty that something bigger than you is moving just outside your awareness. Have you ever gone through that? The kind of experience that stays with you long after it passes, reminding you that not everything can be explained. If this beginning is already awakening something in you, tell me your thoughts in the comments and let me know if you have ever sensed something invisible guiding or warning you. And while you reflect on this first step into humanity's earliest spiritual awakening, remember to like this video and check if you are already subscribed to the channel. What comes next will push this idea even deeper as the journey into our origins continues through what shaped the minds of our earliest ancestors. The early mind did not separate danger from meaning. For our distant ancestors, every unexpected sound, every flicker in the corner of the eye, every vibration in the ground carried a weight far greater than simple sensory input. The unknown was not a curiosity. It was a presence. Living in open landscapes, filled with predators and unpredictable forces, the first humans developed an extraordinary sensitivity to patterns. A shift in the wind meant something. A sudden silence meant something. They were constantly interpreting signals, not through logic, but through a deep, instinctive awareness shaped by millions of years of survival. This relentless interaction with the environment created the perfect soil for the earliest spiritual impressions to take root. What we now call fear was for them a heightened state of perception. Imagine walking through tall grass as night falls, knowing that your life depends on noticing what others might ignore. The crack of a branch could be a predator, a rival group, or something else entirely, something that seemed to exist beyond the visible world. Over time, their minds began weaving connections between these experiences, building a world view in which nothing was accidental. A gust of wind that arrived at the exact moment they hesitated felt like a warning. A strange pattern in the clouds became a sign. Their inner world merged with the outer world through a thread of invisible meaning. This constant interpretation shaped the earliest form of understanding the unseen. They did not speak of spirits or entities because the concepts did not exist yet, but they behaved as though the world was inhabited by forces capable of intention. When the environment reacted, they reacted back. It was an unspoken dialogue, a language formed long before words. The unknown shaped their decisions, guided their movements, and carved itself into their collective memory. Even without stories or symbols, these early humans already carried the seeds of something larger, something that would eventually grow into ritual, belief, and the idea that the world was filled with presences that could influence their fate. Through this growing relationship with the invisible, they began to sense that danger was not the only force in the dark. There was also protection, intuition, and moments when the unknown seemed to offer guidance instead of threat. This shift, subtle but powerful, created the foundation for everything that would follow, preparing their minds to assign meaning not only to fear, but to the mysterious forces that shaped their survival in ways they could feel but not yet describe, leaving an open path for the next evolution of their spiritual awareness. As the early humans moved through their harsh landscapes, something transformative began to happen in their perception. Danger was no longer understood as a random event, and the unknown was no longer a shapeless force. Their minds started to give structure to the invisible. A shadow that moved too quickly was not simply a threat. It felt like a presence with intention. A growl in the distance became the voice of something that existed beyond the physical creature producing the sound. In this environment of constant uncertainty, the earliest seeds of spiritual thought formed not through imagination, but through survival-driven reasoning that tried to make sense of patterns too complex to ignore. Picture these ancient beings gathering around dim fires, their bodies exhausted but their senses still alert. When a predator attacked silently from the dark, they could not see it until it was too late. Soon, they began to believe the threat itself existed before the animal emerged, a force that manifested through the feeling of being watched or the sudden tightening in the chest that warned them of ambush. This merging of instinct and interpretation marked the beginning of invisible identities taking shape in their minds. Fear slowly evolved into the sense that something unseen orchestrated these events, that the world responded with intention, guiding and threatening them in ways that transcended physical interaction. When storms arrived without warning, the sky seemed to speak. When an unexpected calm fell over the valley, it felt like a presence holding its breath. These experiences created a new framework in their consciousness, where the boundaries between physical forces and invisible agents blurred. They began anticipating danger, not because they saw it, but because they felt it approaching, and this sensation grew into the belief that forces existed beyond animals and natural events. The invisible became a character in their lives, one they interacted with through fear, intuition, and interpretation. With time, this sense of the unseen turned into an early form of narrative. They passed these impressions from one individual to another, not with structured language, but with gestures, warnings, behaviors, and shared glances that carried meaning. A certain area of the forest was avoided not only due to predators, but because of the overwhelming sensation that something lived there, something that could not be fought or outrun. These interpretations carved paths in their collective memory, shaping how they navigated the world long before belief systems existed. Through this continuous exchange between environment and instinct, the earliest humans gave the invisible a place in their reality, allowing the first outlines of spiritual forces to emerge in their minds, connected to every threat, every sign, every moment, when the world seemed to speak through events they could not fully understand, preparing them for the next stage of what these presences would eventually become. As the first humans confronted the raw power of nature, they began to notice that certain elements held extraordinary influence over their survival. Fire could destroy or protect. Rivers could nourish or drown. The wind could warn or conceal. Slowly, these natural phenomena became more than mere environmental forces. They transformed into the earliest representations of what they might have called entities. The roar of a waterfall was not only the sound of falling water, but the voice of a presence commanding attention. The flicker of lightning was not just illumination across the sky, but a flash of power that demanded respect. In the absence of language or structured belief, these elements filled the role of spiritual agents, shaping decisions, guiding movement, and instilling caution in ways that were impossible to ignore. Every tribe member learned to interpret these signs, to read the invisible instructions embedded in the natural world. As their awareness expanded, rituals began to form, simple yet profound. Circling a fire at night, performing movements that mimicked animal behavior, offering food or tokens to the unseen forces. They were learning to influence the invisible entities that had always shaped their lives. The first spiritual gestures were born not from imagination, but from observation and the desperate need to survive. Patterns in the stars became maps. The rhythm of the tides informed movement. Even a strange shadow cast across the forest floor could be read as guidance or warning. Each action reinforced the belief that the world was filled with presences beyond human perception, beings that watched, judged, and intervened in subtle ways. This understanding created cohesion within tribes, as everyone shared the same sense of reverence and caution toward forces that could not be touched, only sensed and respected. These early practices were more than superstition. They were survival strategies encoded as rituals, giving humans a framework to interpret the unpredictable. The invisible entities that seemed to govern storms, earthquakes, and sudden predator attacks were now part of their cognitive reality, creating a mental architecture that allowed them to anticipate threats and opportunities alike. The elements became teachers, and the reactions of the tribes to these forces became the foundation for what would evolve into belief systems. The perception of the unseen as active, responsive, and purposeful allowed early humans to negotiate their environment in ways that purely physical understanding could not provide. At this point, it is important to pause and reflect. Can you imagine the courage it took to respect and interpret forces you could neither see nor fully understand? Think about how your own awareness of subtle patterns and unseen influences might echo these ancient instincts. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever felt guided by something invisible or sensed the weight of unseen forces? Your insights help us explore the mysteries of early spirituality together, and they may reveal just how deep our connection to the invisible has always been. As these early humans interpreted the invisible forces surrounding them, a remarkable shift occurred. Fear and observation began to transform into shared ritual and collective understanding. When a tribe reacted to a dangerous animal or a sudden storm, the actions of one member influenced the perception and behavior of others. Over countless nights huddled near fires, these instinctual responses became patterns of behavior, forming the earliest proto-rituals. Through repetition and observation, gestures that were once purely reactive began to take on meaning. Crossing a river at a specific moment, leaving offerings near a sacred rock, or positioning oneself in a certain way during a thunderstorm were no longer simply about immediate survival. They became shared cultural acts. In doing so, these behaviors strengthened social bonds, aligning the tribe's understanding of the invisible with practical strategies for safety and continuity. This early codification of interaction with unseen forces allowed humans to project intention onto the environment. A sudden crack in a tree branch was no longer just a natural sound. It became an event with purpose. If repeated, it could be interpreted as a warning or a signal from the unseen entities that governed their reality. The collective consciousness began to encode these patterns as lessons, warnings, and guidance. Tribes learned that the invisible was not capricious, it was consistent and could be influenced, if only subtly, through careful action and attention. Even without language or formal storytelling, humans were creating a symbolic network, a proto-religion grounded in the tangible outcomes of observing the intangible. In this environment, communication evolved beyond spoken words. Shared gestures, body positioning, and vocalizations began to carry complex meanings about the invisible forces at play. A raised hand could signify caution or respect. A rhythmic chant could honor or appease unseen powers. Children learned by imitation, elders transmitted knowledge through demonstration, and the environment itself became a teacher. Every day presented new opportunities to refine these interactions, expanding the collective intelligence of the tribe. By encoding their understanding of invisible entities into social practices, humans were not only protecting themselves, they were laying the foundation for the mental architecture of belief. These shared rituals became the first bridges between perception and explanation. The invisible forces that once inspired raw fear now shaped social structure, cooperation, and decision-making. The early humans were beginning to grasp that survival required not only physical skill, but also a sophisticated awareness of the unseen patterns that governed their world. The actions of the tribe, guided by instinct and observation, evolved into behaviors that hinted at intention, morality, and sacredness. It was in these subtle shifts, in the repetition of meaningful acts, that the earliest forms of spiritual and social order began to emerge, preparing the stage for the first conscious leaders and interpreters of these invisible powers. As the first tribes began to formalize their interactions with the unseen, certain individuals naturally assumed roles of guidance and interpretation. These proto-leaders were not rulers in the conventional sense. Their authority came from insight, awareness, and the ability to interpret patterns that others could feel but not fully understand. A sudden wind that whispered through the grass, the approach of predators before they were seen, or the behavior of other tribes. All these cues were read and communicated by a few highly observant individuals. They became the first mediators between the tangible and intangible, shaping decisions and providing direction in ways that reinforced the survival of the group. Their presence marked the emergence of what we might now recognize as spiritual leadership. These early interpreters possessed an acute sensitivity to both natural and social cues. They could anticipate changes in weather, identify signs of danger, and detect anomalies in the behavior of animals or other humans. Their knowledge was not written down. It existed in memory, observation, and shared ritual. When a leader made a gesture, performed a chant, or positioned the tribe in a particular formation, the others followed, trusting that these actions aligned with the guidance of the invisible forces that governed their lives. This created a feedback loop. The tribe's survival validated the leader's interpretations, and the leader's role was reinforced by successful navigation of the environment. In essence, the first spiritual authority arose organically from competence, intuition, and the ability to translate invisible patterns into actionable guidance. This emergence of leadership also affected social cohesion. Tribes were no longer just groups of individuals reacting instinctively to stimuli. They became organized communities capable of shared anticipation and collective response. Leaders helped codify practices, ensuring that everyone understood which actions were necessary to appease or respect the unseen forces and which were dangerous to ignore. These early leaders often became the keepers of memory and story, transmitting knowledge across generations. They ensured that the experiences of one member could benefit the entire tribe, turning instinct into strategy, observation into ritual, and fear into understanding. Through these dynamics, the foundations of structured spirituality began to emerge. Leadership intertwined with the interpretation of invisible forces, creating the first form of social authority that relied not on physical dominance, but on insight, perception, and the ability to read patterns beyond the immediate senses. This set the stage for the next crucial development: the creation and transmission of stories and narratives that captured the essence of these unseen powers. The rituals and guidance established by these first leaders would become the medium through which early humans shared meaning, reinforced cohesion, and laid the groundwork for complex spiritual systems that extended far beyond survival. As the first spiritual leaders guided their tribes through the mysteries of the invisible, the Chavao power of story began to emerge. Oral transmission became the vessel for preserving knowledge, experience, and the interpretations of unseen forces. Around fires, under the stars, elders recounted events imbued with meaning: how the sudden crack of a branch saved a life, how the river's flow shifted in response to careful observation, how the wind seemed to carry messages from unseen entities. Each story was more than entertainment. It was a lesson, a map for survival, and a framework for understanding the intangible forces shaping their world. Through repetition and collective memory, these stories created a shared reality in which invisible entities became central figures, guiding, warning, and sometimes protecting the tribe. These narratives were not static. As each member interpreted the events differently, stories evolved, incorporating new insights, subtle variations, and symbolic interpretations. A tale of a hidden predator became a narrative about respect for unseen powers. A night of stormy skies was remembered as an encounter with a force beyond human comprehension, teaching vigilance and humility. These stories reinforced the authority of leaders, codified behavioral norms, and provided a framework for collective decision-making. Over generations, the repetition of story and ritual fused into a cultural architecture, ensuring that the lessons of the invisible world endured far beyond the life of any individual. The act of storytelling also strengthened bonds within the tribe. As members listened, observed, and later reenacted the narratives, they internalized the patterns and principles embedded in each tale. Shared memory became shared understanding. The invisible, once a source of fear and unpredictability, was now represented in symbolic forms that everyone could recognize and respect. Children learned early to interpret subtle cues, respond to unseen signals, and participate in rituals that connected them to forces larger than themselves. The invisible entities were no longer abstract. They were embedded in the collective consciousness, shaping perception, behavior, and social cohesion. This process of transmitting knowledge orally created a bridge between instinct and culture, perception and belief. Stories became repositories of experience, carrying not only the memory of events, but also the understanding of how the invisible interacted with human life. By sharing these narratives, tribes could anticipate danger, recognize opportunity, and cultivate a sense of purpose that transcended individual survival. The invisible, once chaotic and unknowable, was now encoded in memory, gesture, and voice. At this point, it is essential to reflect on your own experiences with stories, signs, or subtle intuitions. Have you ever felt a message, warning, or guidance that you could not fully explain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your reflections may illuminate the ways invisible forces still shape our perception today, just as they guided the first humans millions of years ago. The natural world, with its unpredictability and raw power, continued to shape the consciousness of early humans, guiding the evolution of their perception and spirituality. Storms, earthquakes, and sudden shifts in the environment were not merely random events, they were signals that demanded attention, interpretation, and action. Over time, these phenomena became deeply embedded in the cognitive frameworks of the tribes. Patterns emerged where chaos once dominated, and humans began to recognize that unseen forces could be understood, anticipated, and even influenced through careful observation and ritual. The interplay between humans and nature created a feedback loop. As early humans responded to environmental cues, the outcomes reinforced their interpretations, solidifying a belief in entities that governed aspects of life beyond human control. The interaction with these forces led to more sophisticated methods of sensing and responding to danger. Early humans learned to anticipate not just predators or weather, but the subtle movements of their surroundings, interpreting vibrations in the earth, shifts in the air, and sounds carried by the wind. These phenomena were often understood as the actions of invisible entities guiding events in ways humans could feel, but not yet describe. This heightened awareness allowed tribes to survive in harsh environments, transforming instinct into knowledge and perception into a kind of early science. Their understanding was not abstract, it was a practical tool encoded in their behavior, rituals, and collective memory. As generations passed, the role of observation extended beyond immediate survival. The mysterious forces of nature became teachers, instilling lessons about cause and effect, patience, timing, and respect for powers beyond the visible. Certain locations were designated as sacred, not because of arbitrary belief, but because repeated interactions with these areas revealed patterns of guidance and protection. A river bend might signal safety, a high cliff might indicate danger, and a particular grove might inspire rituals of respect. Through repeated experience, humans learned that invisible entities were not capricious. They followed patterns, responded to human action, and could be acknowledged, appeased, or interpreted to guide behavior. This integration of natural forces and early spiritual insight laid the groundwork for symbolic thinking, imagination, and the conceptualization of entities beyond the immediate physical world. By observing, interpreting, and ritualizing their relationship with the environment, early humans were not only surviving, they were developing the cognitive and social foundations of spirituality. Their understanding of invisible forces, combined with shared experience and ritual practice, created a complex web of meaning that structured life, behavior, and thought. In this context, phenomena once terrifying or mysterious became opportunities for knowledge, connection, and cultural continuity, preparing the tribes for the more intentional spiritual practices and moral frameworks that would follow in the next stages of human evolution. As early humans continued to navigate a world shaped by both visible and invisible forces, their understanding of these entities evolved alongside their social structures. No longer were responses purely individual or instinctual. Perception became a shared endeavor, with groups interpreting environmental cues collectively. Patterns once recognized by a single observer were confirmed through communal experience, and knowledge of invisible forces began to be codified through repeated practice and observation. Each ritual, gesture, or cautionary tale transmitted within the tribe reinforced a common understanding of the unseen, creating a cultural memory that extended the reach of individual perception across generations. The invisible entities, once frighteningly unknowable, became a framework through which humans could anticipate, explain, and interact with the natural and social world. This communal engagement with the unseen also influenced cooperation and planning. By recognizing signs, signals, and subtle changes in the environment as meaningful, tribes could coordinate movements, hunting strategies, and settlement locations. Those who were most attuned to these invisible cues often guided the group, subtly shaping decisions and behavior in ways that ensured survival. Over time, certain behaviors became codified as sacred, and the repetition of these acts transformed them into proto-religious practices. A carefully timed movement during a hunt, a ceremonial gesture by a river, or the marking of specific sites within a territory became more than practical measures. They were acknowledgements of forces beyond immediate comprehension, woven into the rhythm of daily life. Through this interplay between observation, experience, and shared understanding, early humans began to assign meaning not only to survival but to existence itself. The invisible entities that had once inspired fear now represented order, guidance, and continuity. Knowledge of these forces was embedded in memory, action, and storytelling, linking practical survival to conceptual reflection. This cognitive expansion enabled early humans to explore not only the external world, but also the internal, fostering imagination, foresight, and ethical consideration. The seeds of symbolic thought, narrative, and morality were planted in the constant dialogue between humans and the unseen powers surrounding them. By integrating perception, memory, and social cohesion, these proto-beliefs shaped both behavior and consciousness. Every event, from the sudden crack of a branch to the rhythmic sound of waves, was interpreted as an opportunity to learn and adapt. The invisible entities became a lens through which the world was understood, providing guidance, warning, and structure. In these processes, the early humans were constructing the first cognitive and cultural scaffolding for what would eventually evolve into structured spirituality, moral systems, and the shared understanding of sacred forces that shaped not only survival, but identity. This foundation set the stage for the culmination of these developments, as human consciousness began to crystallize into deliberate interaction with the sacred and the unseen. As these early humans refined their understanding of invisible forces, they began to move from reactive survival to intentional interaction. Observation of natural events, animal behavior, and subtle environmental cues became integrated into deliberate action. Certain sites were revisited for ritual, patterns were encoded into shared memory, and behaviors once instinctual became conscious practices. The invisible entities that had guided their instincts were now acknowledged, respected, and even communicated with through gestures, chants, and offerings. This shift marked a profound leap. Humans were no longer just responding to the unknown. They were engaging with it, shaping their decisions, and building a collective framework for interpreting reality beyond what the senses could immediately detect. Over generations, this engagement with the unseen developed into structured rituals, symbolic storytelling, and shared understanding that transcended immediate survival. Practices that once seemed practical became infused with meaning. Every repeated gesture, every carefully timed act, was both homage and experiment, an attempt to interact with forces that had long influenced life in ways too subtle to measure. The earliest leaders and storytellers formalized these interactions, ensuring that knowledge, insight, and reverence were preserved across time. Invisible entities shaped behavior, informed decisions, and provided continuity, creating the first forms of structured spiritual cognition that would eventually influence moral, social, and cultural evolution. Even today, echoes of this ancient dialogue remain in how humans respond to the unseen. Intuition, ritual, and the search for meaning reflect patterns established millions of years ago, when survival depended on interpreting signals from forces both natural and mysterious. By tracing this lineage, we can see that spirituality, belief, and awareness of the invisible are not arbitrary. They are the product of relentless observation, collective learning, and the drive to understand a world larger than ourselves. These invisible entities, once guides of survival, became architects of thought, social cohesion, and the human imagination itself. If you've followed this journey through the earliest human perceptions, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt the presence of something unseen shaping your decisions or guiding your intuition? Leave your experience below. It helps. Continue the exploration of humanity's first sacred connections. Don't forget to like this video if you found it insightful, and make sure you're subscribed so you can continue uncovering the hidden forces that shaped our ancestors. There's another video linked that dives even deeper into these ancient mysteries, and exploring it will expand your understanding of how the unseen guided the very first tribes of humanity.